And of course, my poll panel disappears as soon as I do that. All right, so we're going to talk about emergency action today, but we wanted to start off with a poll. And so, if you're near the keyboard, I know some of you are there as groups, but grab the mouse and start answering this. This is a pretty simple poll, one question, and it's just kind of, what is your emergency resume? Have you been involved with any one of these events? Car crash, fire, injury to you or someone around you, medical emergency like a heart attack or choking or something like that, earthquake, criminal or terrorist event, serious weather event, an emergency during an event, maybe an event that your organization is hosting. And so I quizzed Brent on the first session of this, so I'll quiz Doug on this one. About how many of these apply to you, Doug?
Almost all of them.
That's what Brent and myself found out in the first session, was a pretty high percentage of those we've been involved with. Now that may be a factor of our line of work, our occupation, and we deal with these things. But I decided to throw this question, this poll on there, because of to help us understand that, hey, emergencies happen. There are things that each of us can face. All right, it looks like everybody that's started is finished. So here are the results of the poll. 56% have been involved in a car crash, 24% a fire, 59% an injury around somebody around us, medical emergency, a heart attack, 32%, earthquake, 21%, criminal event, terrorist event, 15%. That one kind of surprised me. It was 6 in the first session. Serious weather event. Brent brought up that he was on a tropical island when a hurricane came through. This picture on the slide that we have there is of the tornado coming through Salt Lake City. I just got on an airplane and flown out just minutes before that came through. I imagine my plane flew through the cloud that came out of, and didn't know about it until I got off the plane in Los Angeles, and all the voicemails started popping up. My wife said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And how about an emergency during an event, maybe that we're hosting? 18%. That's pretty significant when we think about it. And that's really the point we wanted to drive home, was that emergencies happen, and every one of us will be around an emergency throughout the course of our life, if not involved in that emergency. And many of us will take action to respond and help that out. How do we make sure that we do the right thing when that happens? And that's what today's webinar is about, is taking the appropriate action when an emergency happens. So I went and did a little research and looked up definitions. What's the definition of an emergency? And I found a half a dozen different definitions, but they all had a common factor there. So let me read this one, because this seemed to be the clearest. A serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. You know what the one common thread was among all the definitions that I found? It was that last part, requiring immediate action. We got to do something about this. And I thought that went right along with our subject, is an emergency happens. The steps, the things that we do in those critical seconds as an emergency is taking place are important. They're the difference between life and death. Something as simple as, when do I call 911, can mean the difference between life and death. If I put that off just a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, that might mean somebody doesn't make it. All right. Definition of action: the process of doing something, especially when dealing with a problem or difficulty. So we've got to take action. We've got to do something to handle this situation, realizing that there are emergencies and there are emergencies. There are things that are as simple as I slice my finger with a piece of paper and now I'm bleeding and I need to find a Band-Aid, all the way up to something the size of the hurricane that just hit the Carolinas, and where we have millions of people that are affected by this weather event. And each of us have to be able to deal with whatever the emergency is that comes to us. So how do we go about doing that? Here's a question. It's easy to act in an emergency, right? We just do what we need to do. Well, wrong. It's pretty hard. And why is it that people don't do the right things when an emergency is taking place? Well, here's some thoughts on that. A lot of times the failure that we have is failure to act. We just don't do anything. And why would somebody do that? Well, an emergency is a difficult thing. It puts us out of our comfort zone. This is something that we didn't expect, that doesn't happen every day. And suddenly I'm faced with this, and occasionally people will just stand there and watch and not take an action that could easily make the situation better, or maybe even save somebody's life. Sometimes it's just such a huge shock to our system that we don't take action, or we don't take the right action. You ask yourself, why have you got a picture of a little toy tractor on this slide? Well, as I was preparing for this presentation, I thought back to an experience when my oldest child was probably 3 or 4 years old, just old enough to really be getting into toys, and he really liked trucks and tractors and various things like that. And one day I'm at work, and I get a phone call from my wife, and she's panicked. You can just hear in her voice that she's really stressed out. And I asked her what's going on, and she said, Thomas will be mad because I said his name in here. Thomas took a tire off of his toy tractor and stuck it up his nose. So he'd taken this front little tire off the tractor and he stuck it up his nostril. And my wife was panicked. She's like, it's up there, I can't reach it, I can't get it out. And she was about in hysterics at this point. Now, I was on the other end of the phone, miles away, and maybe I could sit here and say, yeah, well, I'm a great emergency manager or whatever. Maybe the distance makes it easier. I said, well, honey, take your finger and place it on the opposite nostril and have him blow his nose, which he did, and it promptly shot the tire across the room, and all was well. Now, was I a great emergency manager there? No. But I was far enough from the situation that I wasn't panicked. My wife was really concerned that this tire was going to go up and affect our son's brain, or whatever the concern was that she had, and it was a valid concern. But she wasn't necessarily thinking as clearly as she should have at that moment. And that's not taking my wife down. Emergencies are hard. They're difficult things to respond to. All right. Well, here's some other reasons why we don't act correctly. Sometimes it's lack of knowledge. I don't know how to use a fire extinguisher. I don't know how to do CPR. I don't, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes it's lack of ability. I haven't actually done this. I sat through the class, but I haven't actually done it. And when it comes to operating that fire extinguisher, I can't figure out how to pull the pin out because there's this plastic thing holding it in. And I've seen a lot of things over the years where people just failed to act, or they didn't act appropriately, and a lot of it was because they hadn't practiced. They hadn't actually done the thing that they were trying to do. And sometimes it's lack of mental preparedness. When a bad thing happens, somebody's seriously injured, somebody dies, or there's a fire, or something that really throws us out of normalcy, out of our comfort zone, that can really affect our mental state. And unless we've gone through and prepared for this ahead of time, we probably will not make the right decisions. We may not act at all. Okay, so we need to get prepared for those. All right. So here's a quote. Of course, it's a quote from me. The only time I get quoted is in my own presentation, so I have to put those up every once in a while. The only way to act correctly during an emergency is to adequately prepare prior to the emergency. And I really believe that. Thinking through my life, the times that I've done really well when emergencies happen have been those cases when I was well prepared for it through one of these things. Here's some ways to prepare. Get trained. Physical preparation, mental preparation, and practice. Let's talk about each one of those things. So training. Of course, you know that the trust really believes in training. We spend a lot of time and resources getting information to you to help you be prepared for whatever it is, whether it's an OSHA compliance thing or an emergency response thing like CPR or first aid. So get out and get trained on some of these things. One of the other questions that I did in the first that we had problems with the poll was, are you CPR or AED certified? Are you first aid certified? Have you gotten those trainings? Those are simple things that if you haven't done those, set a goal today. I'm going to sign up for a class and get out and get that confidence. So if I'm out to dinner and the guy at the table next to me clutches his chest and tips over onto the floor, I know what to do in those situations. And many of you out there have heard Doug's story of when his father had a heart attack and he was faced with doing CPR just like that on a day that was just a day like any other. And all of a sudden, he's faced in doing that. And he did a great job in saving his father's life, keeping him going until the medical care could arrive, till the first responders could arrive. Site-specific training is also something that we should look at. Do I know how to turn off the gas or the electricity or the water? I have a pipe break inside of our building. The quicker I can turn that water off, the less damage that will occur. It may be a minor thing as far as people getting injured, but it can be a major thing when it comes to cost and shutting our business down for a number of days. So site-specific things. Seek out that type of training. Physical preparedness. And you'll see a lot, FEMA and other emergency response organizations, the Red Cross talks about making a kit, and we have as well. If you go into our webinar recordings, you can find one in there on what's in your go bag, and we highly recommend that you have some supplies available. Personal supplies, you can also have those at an organization basis, but think about, where am I going to be when an emergency happens? At the office? In my company vehicle as I'm out doing my job, somewhere else, or a combination of all of those. We want to have those materials available there. When we talk about emergency supplies and info, it's not just a first aid kit and flashlight. We also want to think about what type of information might I need outside of my normal comfort zone. Are we sorry, I was just looking at a comment there. Am I going to have the information available if I'm standing out in the parking lot, my building's on fire and the firefighters are there? Maybe we've got one of our people is missing. We haven't been able to account for everybody, and we're trying to tell the firefighters where this person's work area is. Do I have a map of the building, a facility diagram? Do I have information such as phone numbers and other things that I might need in the event of an emergency? Do I know where those emergency controls are? How to shut that machine off? How to control the power, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's mental preparation. This is one that's kind of a challenge. Well, how do I mentally prepare for one of my family members? Sorry to pick on Doug, I didn't talk about this, but how do you mentally prepare for your father having a heart attack? And you're walking along and all of a sudden he tips over. That's a hard thing. And in a lot of cases, if we're not mentally prepared for that, we may not take the right action. We may not take action at all. So number one for mental preparedness is we have to accept that an emergency can happen to us, that one of our family members can have a heart attack, that one of our coworkers can slip and fall, or whatever that emergency may be. The building catches on fire. It can happen to us, and when that happens, I've got to be able to deal with it. If I accept it, then I can plan for it and prepare for it. So let's plan how I will act. Think about the types of emergencies that can happen where you work. It's going to be different for every type of operation, but how will I respond if there's an active shooter situation? All of a sudden, I hear gunshots in a different part of the building. What do I do? Where do I go? How do I respond in my particular location and with my responsibilities where I work? What do I do, and plan from there? If you ask yourself that question today, what do I do, and you don't know, that's a way to prepare mentally. Write down a list. These are the possible incidents that are emergencies that can happen, and here's what I'm going to do given that situation. Okay. Another thing that we can do is learn from others. There have been a lot of people that have gone through similar types of emergencies as what you're preparing for, and some of them have done well, and some of them have done not so well, and we can learn from both of those. What did they do well? What didn't they do well? In our sphere, in the government sphere, local governments, we can look to other organizations and say, hey, you guys had a fire and then a mudslide. How did you deal with that? How did you handle this? Or how did you handle, we've just had these fires, and I think Brent's going to talk about that because he lives in the area down there. But how do we deal with evacuations for an extended period of time? All of those things, let's learn from other organizations and other people that have gone through this. All right. One of the essential steps of being prepared for an emergency is to practice, is to do the things that we're preparing for. When you go to that CPR class or you go to a first aid class, not only do they teach you this is what you should do, but they give you hands-on practice in how to do that. Sometimes it's really hard. It's a lot harder to do something than just what it looks like when we're watching it. I teach the HAZWOPER classes, hazmat classes, and one of the things is putting on a chlorine emergency kit onto a chlorine cylinder. Well, I'm here to tell you that if you open that box the first time when you're when you've got chlorine leaking around you, a deadly gas, you're not going to be able to do very well. You got to practice. You got to be there. We talked about muscle memory, trying to make this thing just a part of what we do. Police officers, law enforcement officers go to the firing range multiple times during the year, and they practice lots of different scenarios to make that weapon simply muscle memory. They're not worried about getting that weapon out of the holster or how to hold it properly, because they've done it 1,000 times and they know how to do that. I put this picture on here because I was rereading a great book about World War II and some airmen that crashed in the Pacific Ocean, and anyway floated, and they became prisoners of war. Anyway, great book. But one of the things that the author does in this book is she talks about what went into the training for these airmen as they were going on these duties. And even though there was a huge rush to get these men ready to go fight in World War II, they took the time to drill and drill and drill, and they'd done all of these things 1,000 times. So when an emergency happened on this bomber and they crashed into the ocean, each man had his responsibilities and did those important things, even though several of them perished. Most of them, in fact, perished in the crash, because they had done their responsibility in an emergency. The others were able to survive. Anyway, great book, and if you're interested, let me know. So emergency imperatives. Here's some things that that I've learned over my career as being essential to having a successful emergency response. Number one is scene safety. If you're a volunteer firefighter, EMT, or some other form of first responder, the first lessons that you give or that you receive, and probably the most important, is scene safety. How do I make sure that I don't end up dying in this emergency? How am I going to ensure that I don't get electrocuted or get exposed to blood or bloodborne pathogens, something like that? Assessing the area, making sure we have proper personal protective equipment is essential. I had an experience early on in my career. Heard a bunch of commotion around the corner in the safety office. I walked around the corner, and one of the employees had come in, and he had a nasty accident and sliced his wrist and cut an artery. And he was literally spurting blood, squirting across the room. And one of my coworkers, who had lots of training, she dealt with a lot of emergencies in the past, came around the corner and saw the same thing that I did just before I did, and she dove right in. She didn't take a second to put gloves on or glasses or anything like that. She put pressure on this because she didn't want this guy to bleed to death, which is an admirable, noble thing to do, but she put herself at risk. So I came around the corner, put on gloves and glasses, and grabbed the compress, and I asked her to go wash up and get cleaned up, and anyway, she put herself at risk for a good reason, but it still put her at risk. Let's always take safety first, or scene safety first. Prompt notification. Can't say this enough times. Somebody tips over next to you, it might be a heart attack. They might just fallen asleep. But take action quickly. If there's a group of you there and you're going in to assess this person if they're having a heart attack or they're choking or whatever it is, tell somebody, hey, Brent, call 911 now. Assign somebody to do that. Get that call out quickly, because prompt notification, whether it's to 911 or to somebody else in the organization, that's essential. Take action. Don't stand there. Get trained. Get prepared so you feel confident in taking the action, but act. When the first responders show up, we need to assist them. And how do we do that? A lot of times it's just giving information. But many times, one of the most important things we can do is just get out of the way. Give them room to be able to work. Also, assist them in keeping others away. When there's an emergency, a lot of times people crowd around, and they can really hamper the emergency response or put people in jeopardy by getting them too close to the hazard. So let's work to help them have an efficient response, so that person or the building or whatever it is that's impacted can get the assistance that is needed. All right. So just in summary, emergencies happen. They will happen in your lifetime. They will happen to you or family members or coworkers, people around you. We need to be prepared for those. And today's the day to prepare. If you haven't done some of these things, set a goal. Let's get those done today. Set a goal to get training. Physical preparation. Remember that go bag. Remember the supplies that you want to have if something bad happens. Mental preparation. Accept that emergency can happen, and think through what type of emergencies will happen and how do I prepare myself for that. Can I handle this? Well, you can if you've thought it through and you're prepared ahead of time. And then practice, practice, practice. You know what they say, practice makes perfect, and we will be prepared to do that if we thought about it and practice those things that we've prepared. All right, I believe I've covered everything there. If you have a question or a comment, go ahead and type them into the chat box or the Q&A box. Doug and Brent, anything that I missed?
I don't think you missed anything, Jason. That was excellent. I just kind of like to remind people to, avoid complacency. Our scene doesn't change very often. We're in the same work space, the same work environment day after day. We're doing the same kind of jobs day after day. And, where we really get into, trouble sometimes is getting complacent with these situations that we're very accustomed to, even sometimes taking some risks that we kind of maybe grew to don't believe it's a risk anymore because we've been around it so much without anything bad happening. But that's all it takes is for us to not be prepared, for us to make some assumptions that, nothing's going to happen. And it's really important to never make that assumption. These emergencies can happen anytime, any place, where we haven't just totally eliminated the possibility that they can happen through our, actions in mitigating hazards and so forth. So just stay vigilant, no matter how ordinary this, the scene seems.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. Let's see. We did have a question here. Can we take these webinars afterward on your website if we're unable to make the original session? Yes, absolutely. And we encourage you to sign up for the webinar. If a topic interests you, but you can't make it to the live session, sign up for the webinar, and then you'll get a notice when it goes onto the website. You can go to our website. It's kind of a little bit hidden where it is. You go to the website and hover over the member services. I forgot where I was going there, and then go down and it's under webinars. If you click on training and events, those are just for live trainings that are coming up. That's how you can sign up. But if you go in, or you can type in utahtrust.gov/webinars, and that will get you to the recordings. And they're divided into different types. This is the loss prevention, or this is the safety moment. And then we have loss prevention, which are longer. This one a little bit longer today. And you can watch those from there. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Anything else? We're all good. Okay, folks, thank you so much. We appreciate your attendance. Go out and have a safe day.